The first question I've been asked today is from Claire. It's a question about isolation. How can we be content on our own instead of being dependent on other people to be okay? Isolation can be a problem when living on your own during lockdown. In a subsequent email, she added, I think in lockdown you can experience isolation, so it is how turning within means you're at peace by yourself without needing others. Is people-pleasing a defense mechanism of ego to avoid disapproval? Does the fear of not being liked mean we have to give up desire to be liked? Did Ramana have any advice on dealing with grief when a loved one passes? This question about isolation, this is actually a very good question. Why do we sometimes feel uncomfortable when we're on our own, when we're isolated? We are not. It is because the isolation we experience is not real isolation. The state in which we experience true isolation is the state of sleep. And in sleep, we don't experience isolation as a problem. In fact, we don't experience any problem in sleep. In sleep, we are perfectly contented, we are perfectly peaceful. So that is the state of true isolation. In the waking or dream state, we are never totally isolated because we're always accompanied by our mind and its thoughts. Because we experience ourselves as a person we feel there's so many things. As a person we experience, that is, a person is a combination of body and mind and all the five sheaths. As a body, we are insecure in this world. There's no such thing as complete security. So one of the ways in which we find security is in company. When we are with others, we feel somewhat more secure. We also, as human beings, we are social animals. We like the company of others. We thrive on the company of others. But at the root of all this sense of dependence on others, on having the company of others, and not only the company of others, as you say, we want others to approve us. We want others to like us. This is all part of being a social creature. But if we go deeper into this, as ego, we are always dependent on things other than ourselves. That is, ego can never exist in isolation. As soon as we rise as ego, we first identify ourselves as a body. And then we are aware of other things. So without that dependence on phenomena, the first phenomena being whatever body we mistake ourselves to be, without this dependence on phenomena, we cannot exist as ego. As Bhagavan says in, I think at the end of the fourth paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, manam epodum o stulate anusarite nikum. That means the mind stands only by always going after. Literally it means going after, but it means attaching itself to, implies attaching itself to a stulum. That is something that is gross. He's referring here to a physical body. Solitarily, it does not stand. That on its own, the mind cannot stand. It always depends on something, on clinging to something. So when we rise as ego, we are always dependent on things other than ourselves. And among those things, other things that we depend on, it includes other. We like to have the company of other people. I mean, that's all part of our dependence on things other than ourselves. This is the nature of ego. In sleep, we do not rise as ego, so we are totally isolated. We are not. We're not aware of any phenomena whatsoever. but we are perfectly happy and content. We're perfectly peaceful. So the problem, the root of the problem, as the root of this problem, as in all problems, is our rising as ego. When we rise as ego, we become dependent on things other than ourselves. And because we mistake ourselves to be a body, and this body happens to be a human body, the nature of the human body, as humans, we are social creatures. So we like the company of others. We like to be liked by others. We like others to approve of us and everything. So all this dependence, it all originates from our rising as ego. So if we want to overcome this problem of this sense of isolation, when we are on our own without the company of other people, we have to go right to the root of it. The root of it is our rising as ego. If we turn within to investigate who am I, to the extent our attention is focused within, to that extent we as ego subside. And to the extent we as ego subside, all feelings of loneliness and dependence of others, they will subside along with ego, because they're all just the nature of ego. So as with all problems, the solution to this problem, that is the ultimate solution to this problem, is the solution that Bhagavan gives us, the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. To the extent that we turn our attention within and thereby surrender this ego, to that extent we are free of all problems, including problems of loneliness and I don't like to say isolation, because isolation as such is not a problem. The loneliness that results from isolation, that is from being isolated from other people. Regarding the question, is people pleasing a defense mechanism of ego to avoid approval? As I say, as ego, we are now experiencing ourselves as a person, as a human being. And as human beings, we are social creatures. We can more or less say we are herd animals. We survive and thrive in social groupings. And within a social grouping, naturally, it's natural for us to be liked by others, to be disapproved by others. Because if we're disliked, we feel we're excluded from a group, and we always like to be part of a group. That's a very basic feature of human nature. Of course, some people are more dependent on groups than others, and some people are more crave the approval of others more than. But generally, we all have a liking to be liked by others, to be approved by others, to be. That's just a part of our nature. But it's, again, this is a part of our dependence on others. If we want to follow the path that Bhagavan has taught us, we have to be turning within, and the more we turn within, the less we will feel dependent on other people. So the less we will feel the need for approval from other people. We'll be more, because we are centered in ourself. That in ourself means not in ourself as a person, but in our real self, in what we actually are. We will feel less dependence on anything outside. And regarding the question, did Ramana have any advice on dealing with grief when a loved one passes? Well, Bhagavan, according to the situation, according to the needs of people, Bhagavan may have given different advice at different times. I think in talks or somewhere it's recorded, but once Bhagavan said, the dead are happy because they are free of this troublesome overgrowth, the body. It's the problem of bereavement is for those who have survived. We feel we have missed, we have lost someone. But if we think deeply about Bhagavan's teachings and about life in general, we know everything we experience in this life is passing. One day, when one friend or relative passes away, we feel sorry. But we know that one day we're going to pass away and leave all our friends and relatives. so we have to keep these things in perspective. We live in an ever-changing and ever that is ever. Everything in life is fleeting. Everything in life is passing. Nothing is enduring. Why we feel grief when we love someone, it's again, it comes back to our, we as social creatures, we do have a feeling of dependence on others. We want to be with those we love. And if we have special love for a person, when that person passes away, naturally it leaves a feeling, it leaves a hole in our life, as it were. It leaves some emptiness within us. All these things, these are all part of the human experience. We all experience these at times. But to overcome all these problems of grief, problems of loneliness, all these problems, the best solution is the solution that Bhagavan has given us, the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. Because when we are investigating ourselves, we are voluntarily isolating ourselves, not only from other people, we are isolating ourselves from everything. We're even isolating ourselves from our own thoughts, our own feelings. We are just trying to be aware of ourselves alone. The more we practice self-investigation, the more, as Bhagavan says in the 6th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, when one practices and practices in this manner, the strength of the mind to abide in its source increases. Ipadi paraka paraka mandatku tan pirapitik til tangi nikum shakti adikari kindratu. That means when one practices and practices, he's referring to what he said in the previous sentences about how to turn the mind constantly back towards oneself. When one practices and practices in this manner, the power of the mind to remain in its source, in its birth, literally he says birthplace, in its source, increases. So the more we practice this, the more we are able to remain within ourselves. We're able to abide in our source, abide as our source, and thereby our dependence on others, we will feel less, that sense of feeling a need for others will decrease, because we will become more and more centered in the reality that we actually are. I hope that adequately answers Claire's question. Would anyone else like to ask a question either about this or anything else, or shall I go on to the next question? I don't see any hands raised, so I'll just carry on to the next question. The next question is from Ashwin. He says he wants to ask a question relating to the diligent practice of self-enquiry. What he asks is, when you observe your thoughts and ask, to whom do these thoughts arise? I understand we are doing so to destroy the thought. Do we also pay attention to the witness of who is asking the question? And then he says, I find it very difficult to explain what I have observed by doing the practice, but it has been so tremendous, I cannot put it into words. I wanted to follow up with Michael in regard to the clues he says Bhagavan gives when you delve deeper into the practice. Also, is self-inquiry a constant practice? Can we do it all the time? And what happens when we do? The first question, when you observe your thoughts and ask, to whom do these thoughts arise? Self-investigation is not about observing thoughts. Self-investigation is about observing ourselves, observing the thinker of the thoughts. That is, our attention is to be turned towards ourselves. Why Bhagavan sometimes expressed, when explaining the practice, he sometimes expressed it in terms of questions such as, to whom do these thoughts arise? These are clues that Bhagavan has given us to help us to turn our attention back towards ourselves. That is, whatever we may be aware of, who is aware of it? To whom do these phenomena appear? To whom do these thoughts appear? These are ways of turning our attention back towards ourselves. It's not, that is, by way of explanation, Bhagavan expressed it in the form of questions. And we can also, sometimes we may find it helpful to ask these questions in our mind to help turn our attention back. But asking the question is not self-investigation, is not self-inquiry. When the term Atma-vichara in Sanskrit, and the Tamil equivalent, which Bhagavan often used, tannatam, means self-inquiry only in the sense of self-investigation, not in the sense of inquiry in the sense of asking questions. So we need to investigate to whom do these thoughts arise. In the 6th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, where Bhagavan talks about this, the verb he uses in Tamil is vichari, which means to investigate. So he doesn't say ask, he says, what does it matter, if other thoughts arise, without trying to complete them, it is necessary to investigate to whom they have arisen. The verb he uses there, vichari, doesn't mean ask. In some contexts, vichari can mean ask, but it's not the sense in which Bhagavan's using it here. Here he's using it in the sense of investigate. So it's necessary to investigate to whom have they arisen. However many thoughts arise, so what? That means, what's it matter however many thoughts arise? Jagrateai, that is vigilantly, obvoro ennam kalambam podu, as each thought arises, idu yaraku undāyatru, to whom does it arise, or to whom does it appear? Endru vicharital, if one investigates, enakendru tondram, it will be clear to me. That is, Bhagavan isn't here recommending, he's giving us clues here how to turn our attention back towards ourselves. That is, thoughts arise only when we're aware of them. Jagrateai ovara ennam kalambam podo, idu yaraku undāyatru endru vicharital, enakendru tondram. As soon as any thought arises, as each thought arises, as and when each thought arises, if one vigilantly investigates to whom is it arisen, it will be clear to me. Nāṉ Ār endru vicharital, if one investigates who am I, manam tan pirapidatiku tirambividam. The mind, if one investigates who am I, the mind will return to its birthplace. Birthplace means its source. That's our real nature. Erunde ennamum adangividam, the thought which had risen will also subside. If one practices in this manner, the strength of the mind to abide in its source increases. So this is the practice that Bhagavan has given us. But these questions, and we're not just to be asking these questions like a parrot. These questions are just clues that Bhagavan has given us to help us to turn our attention back towards ourselves. That is, whatever thought we may arise, it's arisen in whose view? In my view. So who am I? It's a way of turning our attention away from what is perceived to the perceiver, away from the object to the subject. All thoughts are objects. And here, when Bhagavan talks about thoughts, he's not just talking about the words, but the mental chatter that tends to go on in our mind most of the time. What he means, he uses thoughts in a much broader sense. Bhagavan said the whole world is nothing but thoughts in the 4th paragraph. So we should understand all phenomena are thoughts. That is, thought. Bhagavan uses the term thought in the sense of mental phenomena of any kind whatsoever. So all phenomena, since all phenomena are mental, that is, even what appear to be physical phenomena, they're actually just, as Bhagavan says in the 6th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, the world is nothing but the 5 kinds of sense perception, the 5 kinds of sense data. That is, the world as we know it, it consists of sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations. Take away these, and there is no world. So the world is just, exists only in our perception. And so it's just in our own mind this world exists. So the world is nothing but a mental phenomenon. Just like in dream, we see what seems to be an external world, what seems to be a physical world. But when we wake up, we recognize that what seemed to be a physical world and what seemed to be a physical body, but we experienced as I, they were all only mental. It was all only our own, a figment of our own imagination. It was all only a mental projection. So Bhagavan, when he talks about thoughts, he's using the term thought in the broadest possible sense to mean all mental phenomena. So whenever anything appears, it appears to whom? To me. That is, all phenomena are objects. We who perceive it are the subject. So the aim in self-investigation is to turn our attention away from objects back towards the subjects. So these questions Bhagavan asks, like, to whom does this occur, or who is aware of this? These are just clues to turn our attention away from the object, away from what is perceived, back towards the subject, back towards the one who is perceiving it. So the actual self-investigation is keeping our attention fixed on ourselves. You say, when you observe your thoughts, our aim isn't to observe thoughts. Our aim is to observe only ourselves, the thinker, the subject, the one who is aware of thoughts. Some people take this questioning process very literally, and they wait for the next thought to pop up. And as soon as the next thought pops up, they pop the question, to whom is this thought? And then they wait for the next thought. Their attention is still going outwards. The whole aim of this is to turn our attention within. And once our attention is turned within, we should try and keep it within. We try to hold it, we try to attend only to ourselves and not allow our attention to slip away towards other things. When it slips away towards other things, who is aware of these other things? Me. So we turn our attention back towards ourselves. This is the practice. It's very, very simple. It may seem difficult, but that is because of the strength of our attachment to things other than ourselves. That is because of our Vishaya Vasanas. Vishaya Vasanas means Vasana means an inclination or a tendency, and Vishaya means phenomena. So our inclination to be aware of phenomena is what is constantly drawing our attention outwards. The more we practice this, the more our Vishaya Vasanas are weakened, and our Satvasana, the liking just to be as we are, is strengthened. So this is the practice. So you say, when you observe your thoughts and ask to whom do these arise, I understand, but we are trying to do is to destroy the thought. We need not destroy thoughts. Bhagavan says, what's the matter however many thoughts arise? That is, so what? So what if thoughts arise? But the problem is not thoughts. The problem is our interest in thoughts. But thoughts arise because we like to attend to them. If we withdraw our attention, fix our attention only on ourselves, there'll be no room for any thoughts to arise, because no thought can arise without our being aware of it. And we cannot be aware of it without allowing our attention to go towards it. So if we keep our attention on ourselves, thoughts won't arise. If thoughts arise, what should they remind us? To whom do they arise? To me. They should remind us that no object can be perceived without the subject. So the appearance of objects should remind us of the subject. If we are diligent in this practice, we will find our attention turning more and more back towards ourselves, because we're more and more interested in knowing ourselves. And to the extent we're interested in knowing ourselves, we'll become disinterested in other things. The reason why thoughts keep on arising is because of our interest in other things, because of our attachment to other things. So slowly, slowly, we have to wean our mind off its attachment to and its interest in things other than ourselves. Then you ask, do we also pay attention to the witness of who is asking the question? Well, as I say, we don't have to ask the question, but who is asking the question? The one who is aware of the thoughts. So yes, the witness is ourself as ego. When we rise as ego, we become aware of thoughts. So it is as ego that we are aware of thoughts. In sleep, there's no ego, and so there are no thoughts or phenomena. In waking and dream, ego is present, and so thoughts and phenomena are present. So the witness is ourself as ego. Our aim is to pay attention only to the witness, not to anything that is witnessed. What is witnessed is all the phenomena. The witness is the subject. Who am I? That is, we have to be turning our attention away from what is perceived back towards the perceiver. This is what is called drik, drisya, viveka. Drik means the seer, drisya means what is seen, and viveka is distinguishing these two. So why do we distinguish? Because we want to hold on only to the seer and to ignore what is seen. So the whole aim is to focus our attention only on the witness and not on anything that is witnessed. In other words, perceive the perceiver, don't perceive anything else. Don't perceive what is perceived. Attend only to watch the watcher, attend to one who is attending. That's our aim, constantly turning our attention back towards ourselves. Then you say, I find it very difficult to explain what I have observed during the practice. We cannot explain, because what we are attending to is not a phenomena. We are attending only to the subject. But all phenomena, all objects have certain features that we can describe. That is, we have thoughts, we have feelings, we have the seemingly physical objects of the world. There's so many things. We can describe them in various ways. It's tall, it's short, it's long, it's red, it's blue, or it's warm, it's cold. There's so many ways in which we can describe phenomena. But how can we describe that which is aware of phenomena? How can we? Can you say we all know I am, but can we put in words how it feels to be aware of I am? No, we can't. We all know what it is to be aware of I am, but it's not something that can be described in words, and we need not put it into words. That awareness I am, that is the one fundamental reality. Rather than trying to put anything to words, we should be clinging only to that. And then you said, I want to follow up with Michael in regards to the clues he says Bhagavan gives us. Well, the clues are, I mean, throughout Bhagavan's teachings, he's expressing the practice in so many different ways. Like here in the 6th paragraph that I've just been talking about, he gives this clue of turning our attention back to the one to whom the thought appears. We can take it as questioning, but it need not even be actual questioning, just remembering to turn our attention away from what is perceived back to the one to whom to ourselves, to the one to whom it appears. In other paragraphs, he's used other terms. For example, in the 10th paragraph, he uses the term Swarupa Dhyana. Swarupa Dhyana literally means meditation or contemplation on our own form, our real nature. That means meditating only on ourselves, self-attentiveness. In the 11th paragraph, he uses the term vichara. He also uses the term Swarupa Smarane. That means self-remembrance, or remembering one's own real nature. That is remembering I am, simply, which is another way of expressing self-remembrance and self-attentiveness are really just two ways of expressing the same thing. In the 13th paragraph, he uses the term Atma-chintana. Atma-chintana literally means thought of oneself. So there are so many different terms, and so many, Bhagavan has described the practice in so many ways, seeking the source from which the ego rises, and another way he's described it. So all these, if we think deeply about these, the way Bhagavan has expressed this practice, that will help us to go deeper and deeper within, because in his words, he's giving us clues to keep our attention, or to turn our attention within and keep it fixed within. In the 16th paragraph, he explains what he means by self-investigation. Sada kalamum manate Atma-vichara kutan Atma-vichara mendrupaya. That means the name Atma-vichara refers only to the practice of always keeping the mind in or on oneself. So keeping our attention on ourself, on Atma. Atma means oneself. Keeping our attention on our mind here means attention. When he says if you keep your mind on something, you're attending to it. So keeping the mind on oneself. So what he implies here is that the practice of Atma-vichara is nothing but, Atma-vichara is nothing but the practice of self-attentiveness, keeping our mind always fixed on ourselves, keeping our attention always fixed on ourselves. So I hope that adequately answered that question, Ashwin. Does anyone have their hand raised? Gregor, you've got your hand raised. Would you like to ask?
Hi, Michael. Yeah. So my question is, once the self is realized, or once self-realization occurs, how different is life? Is it just you have no more sense of I am doing this, or I am making this choice, or that diminishes, and is simply you're acting from that self, or what is? Yeah, it's just a serious question.
That state cannot be expressed in words. Bhagavan says in verse 31 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says, here he's using pronouns and verbs in an honorific plural form. So in English we translate it as they, but he's actually talking about one. It's an honorific plural, not a literal plural. So just for simplicity, if we make it singular, because that makes it clearer, for one who he uses the noun Tanmayananda. Tanmayananda means that's got a personal ending on it. So it's one who is Tanmayananda. Tanmayananda means happiness composed of that. That means Brahmananda, happiness that is Brahman. So for one who is completely immersed as Brahmananda, we can say, which rose destroying oneself, that ego, what action exists for doing? That is, there is no action in that state. And then he says, they, or yeah, okay, we'll say they do not know anything other than themselves. That is, in that state, we don't know anything other than ourselves. So who can or how to conceive their state as it is such? We cannot. We are talking from the perspective of ego now. As ego, we are aware of multiplicity, whereas the state of jnana is a state of totally devoid of multiplicity. It's a state devoid of all otherness. It's a state of perfect oneness, a state of pure self-awareness. So there isn't, in that state, there are no others. So from the perspective of our mind, we cannot grasp that, because as mind, we're always aware of otherness. Can you describe the experience of sleep? When we try to describe the experience of sleep, we say, oh, it was dark, it was dull, we describe it only in negative terms. Whereas Bhagavan says, actually, it was pure, it was a state of pure awareness and infinite happiness. It seems to us to be a state of void, because what we now take to be real is all these phenomena. A state without phenomena seems to be an empty state. Whereas actually Bhagavan says it's not a state of emptiness, it's a state of perfect fullness. This state in which we're aware of all these phenomena, this is the state of emptiness. Whereas none of these phenomena have any reality. What is real is only I am. So in the state that is called self-realization is the state where I am alone shines. Total isolation. One of the terms used in Advaita for the state of liberation is kaivalyam. Kaivalyam means isolation. It is the state in which we alone exist. And Brahman is described in the Upanishads as ekam eva advityam, one only without a second. So the state in which we experience ourselves as one only without a second, that is the state that is called self-realization. So in that state, we are no longer aware of ourselves as a person. We're no longer aware. Actions are done by whom? By body, speech, and mind. In that state, there's no body, speech, and mind. When body, speech, and mind exist only in the view of ego. Only when we rise as ego do we seem to be a person consisting of body, speech, and mind. And consequently, there appear to be phenomena. In that state, it's a state of just pure awareness.
Great, thank you.
And I see, Ash, you also have your hand raised. So did you want to ask something more about?
Yes, Michael, just a quick one, just to understand this. So
Yeah.
asking questions is a pointer to help turn attention to the very subtle sense I am.
Yes.
Paying attention is to the self only is the practice and not the questioning. So I understand that.
Exactly.
During the practice, when we see ourselves even an instant as we truly are, then the ego ends forever. So that's it. You just have to see exactly what you are, and that's it.
Yeah.
So the practice can be for an extended period, as in meditation, and also throughout the day when doing other things, by just turning the attention within. Is there anything else that needs to be done to deepen the practice? How do you go deeper if you are only attending to yourself, and then that is the practice?
Because now we have been training our minds, so to speak, for janmas, for countless births, to attend to things other than ourselves. Everything other than ourselves is relatively gross. As you say, the awareness I am is very subtle. All phenomena are, relatively speaking, gross. So we've been focusing our attention on gross things. So our power of attention has, so to speak, become a blunt instrument. When we try and turn it back to attend to ourselves, we are trying to attend to the subtlest thing with a blunt instrument. So what we are doing when we are practicing self-attentiveness, we are sharpening our power of attention, so to speak. We are refining our ability to attend to ourselves alone. Now we are aware, we are always aware of ourselves, but now we are aware of ourselves mixed with adjuncts. Instead of being aware of ourselves just as I am, we're aware of ourselves as I am Ash, I am Michael, I am this body, I belong to such and such place, I have such and such a story. There's so many identifications. Whatever we identify with, these are all Upadē. We need to distinguish ourselves from all Upadē. We need to distinguish I from the body. Though we are now aware of ourselves as I am this body, we need to isolate this I and separate it from the body. For that, we need a very keen and sharp power of attention. In verse 23 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan uses the term nunmatiyal. That means by a subtle intellect. And in intellect there means the power of distinguishing, the power of attention by which we distinguish I from all the adjuncts. And in verse 28, he uses the term kundamatiyal. Kunda means very, a power of attention which has been very, very sharp, acute, or has been sharpened. So in the practice, we are refining, we are sharpening our power of attention. That's one way of expressing it. What is it that makes our attention blunt now is our Vishaya Vasanas, our attachment to, our inclination to attend to things other than ourselves, our inclination to attend to Vishayas, to phenomena. So to the extent that we practice turning our attention within, we are weakening the Vishaya Vasanas. Since the Vishaya Vasanas of a bluntness, By weakening our Vishaya Vasanas, we're sharpening our power of attention. So as our power of attention becomes sharper and sharper, we're able to focus more and more keenly on ourself alone to the exclusion of all else. That's one way of explaining it. Another way of explaining it that Sadhu Om used to say, which is also quite helpful way of considering it. Now our attention is turned outwards towards phenomena. What our aim is to turn our attention 180 degrees away from phenomena, back towards ourselves, the one who is aware of phenomena. So during practice, at first we may be just turning 10, 20 degrees. As we progress in the practice, but as I say, the more we practice, the more the Vishaya Vasanas become weak and the Sat Vasana is strengthened. So to the extent that the Vishaya Vasanas are weakened, that's the power that pulls our attention outward, and the Sat Vasana is strengthened, that's the power that draws our attention within, we're able to turn more and more. So instead of just turning 10, 20 degrees, we're turning 90 degrees, 120 degrees, 130 degrees. But in order to see ourselves as we actually are, we need to be aware of ourself alone, without being aware of anything else whatsoever. That is, we need to be aware only of I am and not of any adjuncts. As Bhagavan says in Upadēśa Undiyār, in verse 25 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, knowing oneself without adjuncts is itself knowing God. Because God shines as oneself. That is, God here means the reality, what we actually are. So our aim is to see ourselves without any adjuncts. So that means we have to turn the full 180 degrees. If we turn 179 degrees, we are still to 1 degree still aware of adjuncts. So we haven't totally separated ourselves from adjunct. When we turn 180 degrees, we are facing only ourselves. We are not seeing anything else. We're not aware of anything else. We're aware of ourselves alone. The state in which we're aware of ourselves alone, that is the state of pure awareness, which is our real nature. So when we see ourselves as pure awareness, the ego, which is nothing but a false awareness of ourselves, and awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are, ego is thereby destroyed. So there's nothing more to the practice when trying to turn and keep our attention fixed on ourselves. But as we go deeper in this practice by focusing our attention more and more on ourselves, which is an ability we acquire by practice. When Bhagavan says, "Ipadi paraka paraka, manam tan piripiditil tangi nikam shakti," when practicing in this way, the power of the mind to remain in its birthplace increases. That the power to remain in the birthplace is power to keep our attention keenly focused on ourselves. Because to the extent our attention is focused on ourselves, to that extent we are remaining as we actually are.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much.
Okay. You actually, I missed the last part of your question, which was, is self-inquiry a constant practice? Ideally, yes. In practice, when we start, we are not able to keep our attention fixed on ourselves all the time. But as we go deeper and deeper in this practice, we will find that current of self-attentiveness will continue even in the midst of other activities. So the practice can become constant. Our aim is for it to be constant, but we shouldn't struggle to make it constant. We need to gently, slowly wean our mind away from its liking to be aware of other things. The more we wean the mind off that liking, off that inclination to be aware of other things, so in other words, wean our mind off its Vishaya Vasanas, the more we will be able to hold on to that self-attentiveness, even in the midst of other activities. So it is possible to do it all the time, not at first, but as we go deeper in the practice, even in the midst of other activities, that tenuous current of self-attentiveness will be continuing in the background. We'll be holding on to at least a certain degree of self-attentiveness, even in the midst of other activities. Because whatever we may be doing, we're always aware I am. We're always aware of ourselves. The problem is we become so absorbed in whatever activities we're doing or whatever thoughts we're thinking, but we neglect our self-awareness. By this practice, we are slowly we're taking more and more interest in knowing, what is this I? Who am I? So as our interest in this subject increases, we'll be holding on to that self-attentiveness more and more, even in the midst of other activities. So even when we are working or talking or anything, that there'll be a subtle background remembrance of that Swarupa Smarana will be continuing, that self-remembrance will be continuing. So have I fully answered your question now?
Yes, Michael, that is very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Ram, I see you've raised your hand, but I'll go on to one more question and then I'll come back to you, if that's okay. The next question is asked by Ravi. He says, I'm aware that turning the mind towards self is the ultimate solution, even to the questions posed below. But steeped in duality, I'm still going ahead with my questions. The first question is, in Hinduism, I have heard, not sure of the source from a text or scripture, but when a person is on the deathbed and is down to his last few breaths, at that moment of his final breath, if he has the name of the Lord on his lips, he attains moksha. It is so hard to focus on God when the mind has been looking outwards during the lifetime of that person. Assuming this is correct, by constantly practicing the turning of mind inwards, if the person, still aware of duality, is able to turn inward during the last living breath of his life, following self-inquiry as prescribed by Bhagavan, will this lead to liberation? You can see from my question that I, like everyone else on this earth, am driven by the mind and am asking such a calculative question with an end result in mind. Please forgive me for this. Yes, it is. I'm sure it's mentioned in some scriptures, but it's a belief in Hinduism. But if you think of either the name of God or the form of God, if you think of God at the time of death, you get liberation, or you go to Swarga, or you go to Vaikuntha, or Shivaloka, or whatever people have. That is the last thought you have at the moment of death is considered very important. Of course, actual liberation, that is so within Hinduism, Hinduism is not just one religion, it's a family of religions. So there's so many different types of beliefs in Hinduism. So there's so many different beliefs about moksha. For some people, moksha means just going to heaven and living with God, or that is going to Vaikuntha and being with Vishnu, or whatever whatever terms they call it. According to Bhagavan, moksha is nothing but the annihilation of ego. And ego cannot be annihilated without our knowing ourselves as we actually are. And we cannot know ourselves as we actually are without turning our attention inwards to face ourselves alone. So if we are able to do that, if we are able to hold on to that self-attentiveness at the last moment of this life, that is a very beneficial moment, because at that moment, we are being forcibly separated from this body for which we generally have so much attachment. So when we are being forcibly separated, it is a very favorable moment. If we can hold on to self-attentiveness at that moment, that can cut all attachments, that we can return to the source and merge back into the source. So it is definitely, it's a favorable time at the last moment of bodily life. However, as you say, if we've not been, or as you imply, if we've not been doing this throughout our life, it's going to be very difficult to do it at the moment of death. At the moment of death, generally, people's mind is trying to cling to all their relatives, to their to their property, to their status in life, to all the things that they've been identified with throughout their life. They're trying to hold on to those things. So even for bhaktas, to remember God at the last minute is not easy, unless they've been, it's only for those whose mind has been dwelling on God frequently throughout their life. For them, it will be relatively easy to hold on to the thought of God at the last moment. Likewise, if we've been persistently practicing this self-investigation throughout our life, it will be easier to hold on to that at the last moment. But why do we have to think about the death of the body? Bhagavan doesn't ask us to know ourselves at the time of death of the body. He asks us to know ourselves here and now. If we are always putting off knowing ourselves till some future time, it's never going to happen, because the future is always receding. We can know ourselves only here and now. So long as our attention is going towards the future or towards the past, we cannot know ourselves. We have to be in the moment. We have to be aware of ourselves as we are here and now. So we need not be too concerned about what happens at the time of death. That's what we are going to be at the time of death, and what we're going to be after death is no different from what we are now. So who am I here and now? That is what we need to find out. And regarding what you say about having an end result in mind, liberation is not something to be gained. Liberation, but when we are liberated, nothing is added to us. Liberation, in the state of liberation, everything is removed from us. It is a state of kaivalyam, where total isolation from everything. Everything is it's a total state of complete renunciation. Everything is given up. Only that is, as Bhagavan often used to say, Nyani is not something to be gained. It's everything. When everything else is lost, what remains is jnana, because jnana alone is the reality. Jnana is what we actually are. So it's not something to be gained. We need to give up everything. In the verse 26 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. So only when we are willing to give up everything do we remain in our natural state, which is the state of jnana. Then you ask another question. This is about a dream. You say, I am at a stage where even if my mind races away and I'm immersed in the world and its activities, I am still aware that I'm projecting this world at every step, influenced by my vasanas and day-to-day bidding of life. As an earthling, I have not seen Mars or Saturn. I do not know anything about the distant Milky Way and several other constellations in existence. I cannot project these mentally, even if I wanted to. Totally ignorant of these planets, constellations, and their inhabitants, extraterrestrials if present, I cannot create the dream. Does this mean ignorance of phenomena can directly lead to dissolution of the ego as the subject I? Does not have any objects to focus on? Pardon me for such a pedantic and totally imaginary question. I have not been to Africa or the Middle East. I can still perceive skyscrapers, trees, houses, humans living in these countries, as they're still part of this earth, and these phenomena would be very similar to what I am accustomed to. Hence, I brought outer space into this question. Or you do know Mars, Saturn, Milky Way, because you've just used these words. You've got some idea about them. Mars is a planet, but somewhere near the sun is a small red planet, and Saturn is somewhere far away and is a big planet. We know a little bit about these things. Saturn, I think, is the one with a ring around it, or maybe I'm wrong. But anyway, we know something about these. We also know the Milky Way is this galaxy is what appears in the sky as the Milky Way. But when we are dreaming, for example, it seems to us that there's a world out there, and we can perceive a small part of that world. We can see only what's in front of us, but we imagine there's a big world, there's a outer space, and there's other countries, and there's other continents and other worlds, and there may be extraterrestrials living in other planets or whatever. All these things we can imagine in our dream. But what actually exists is only what is in our mind at that moment. according to Bhagavan, our present state is just a dream. So all there is to Mars and Saturn is what you know about them now. They're just thoughts in your mind. So it's what projection and perception are not two different things. If we perceive something, and perceive here, I'm not talking just about perceiving through our senses. Now we are perceiving thoughts in our mind, we're perceiving feelings, we're perceiving all sorts of things. Any object that we're aware of, we are perceiving that thing, whether it's a gross physical object or a mental object. In fact, they're all mental objects according to Bhagavan. They're all mental phenomena. So nothing exists beyond what we are here and now immediately aware of. And even these things don't actually exist. They only seem to exist. Where do they seem to exist? They seem to exist within our awareness, within our perception. So when it is said that we have projected a dream, where have we projected it? We've not projected it outside anywhere. We projected it within ourselves. So our projection of a dream and our perception of a dream are not two different things. We project, I mean, the projection and the perception are one and the same thing, because we are projecting into the field of our perception, so to speak, into the field of our awareness. So nothing, this is how perception works. So it shouldn't be difficult to I mean, we can project anything we can think. I mean, whatever we think of, we have projected that thing. We may not have projected it outside, we may be projecting it only in our mind. Some things we seem to be projecting outside, but even those things that seem to exist outside, Bhagavan said they're all only in your own mind. Where we see, now we say we're seeing this world, we're seeing a computer in front of us, we are seeing a room full of all sorts of objects, table, chair, bookcase, all sorts of things may be there. But where are all these things? They're all in our own mind. We're seeing them in our own mind. Because we mistake ourselves to be this body, they seem to be outside. And what's going on inside this body, that is inside. But both the body and the world, they all exist in our mind. But when that is, when we talk about inside and outside, we need to understand from the context what we're talking about. When we talk about the world existing outside, we mean outside this body. When we talk about the organs of the body being inside, we mean inside the body. But when Bhagavan is talking about the practice of self-investigation, he talks about turning within. There he's using within in a much deeper sense. In that sense, everything other than ourselves is outside. We alone are inside. So when he talks about turning within, he means turning back towards ourselves. Everything is outside in the sense that it's extraneous to ourselves. But though it's extraneous to ourselves, it still exists only within the space of our mind, let's say. But even the mind is something extraneous to us. So we need to turn our attention deeper within. Someone else had their hand raised. Oh, Rama, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So actually, this is a follow-up this previous answer you gave. When you talked about engaging the mind and turning it inwards, I think I see this in 3 steps. One is, when the mind is engaged outside and the mind is going into, let's say we do some worldly work which we are doing, and when the mind is focused on it, and at least practically from my end, I felt that, when it is working on something, it seems to be in a kind of meditation in its own way, because the mind is not getting distracted on anything else. It's almost a meditation on the work. And if you treat the meditation on the work itself as a way of, getting the mind to, quieten down and calm it down. And then the second step you talked about was, to turn it inward. Is that a possible path to quietening the mind? Because what I find is when I'm in a focus on a specific thing, it's much more easier to calm the mind than to not do anything, then it becomes all over the place. And then to turn it inward seems a lot more difficult.
Okay.
So it's just a thought that I want to check with you. Is that something which we should even try and based on our own vasanas? Because for some people this may be easier, for some people something else may be easier. But as a first step towards to quieten the mind and calm the mind and not allow it to go anywhere else except maybe something which is very focused.
Okay. So long as we are attending to anything other than ourselves, the quietness of the mind is only a relative quietness. That is, supposing you're engaged in some work which is taking all of your attention. Because your attention is focused on one thing, it's not distracted by other thoughts. So relatively speaking, that is a peaceful state. But still, there is work involved there. That is, to direct our attention outwards is a work. And particularly when we understand what Bhagavan said, but whatever we perceive exists only because we projected it. So it's our directing of our attention outwards is actually producing whatever we're being aware of. There is activity there. It's not a state of total stillness. It's just, it may be relatively a state free of distractions, and so relatively it may seem a calm state. But if we want to go deep and to experience the infinite peace, the absolute peace that is our own real nature, we need to turn our attention within. When we turn our attention within, because most of us still have very strong Vishaya vasanas, our attention keeps on trying to pop outwards. So it does seem to be a bit of a struggle sometimes, keep trying to turn our attention back within and keep it within. But actually, if we accustom ourselves to this practice, particularly in times of when our mind is less agitated by other things, we will find that we're able to retreat in ourselves and we're able to experience a peace such as that we cannot experience in any external activity. It's a far, far deeper peace. That is, the refuge that Bhagavan has given us is the refuge of our own heart. We should constantly be trying to retreat into that refuge. How do we retreat into it? Simply by turning our attention within. To the extent that we turn our attention within, to that extent do we as ego subside and we remain in our Pirapitam, the source from which our birthplace, the place from which we have risen. So though it does take practice. It does take practice, and it may take years of practice till we get that state where we are easily able to retreat within ourselves. But sometimes it's easier to retreat within ourselves than at other times. But sometimes when our mind is much agitated, much disturbed, it seems very difficult to retreat within ourselves. But sometimes when our mind is much disturbed, we find suddenly we're able to retreat within ourselves and all the disturbance goes like that. So it varies from time to time. I mean, mind is fickle, so we can never predict how the mind is going to be. But our aim is to slowly, slowly, slowly cultivate this habit of turning within. This will, though you may get benefit, you may feel you get benefit by concentrating on some external work and thereby freeing your mind from other distractions, but whatever benefit you get from that is very insignificant to the great benefit you will derive from the effort you make to turn within.
I was just equating with karma yoga and our nama japa, any of that, right? I mean, ultimately what you're trying to do is keep the mind focused on something.
But what is karma yoga? Karma yoga is nishkarmiya karma. It's not just doing the action, it's doing it without any desire for any fruit. And as Bhagavan explained, we cannot do nishkarmiya karma unless we are doing that action for the love of God. That's why in verse 3 of Upadēśa Undiyār, Bhagavan said, Kartano kakum, that is done for God. That means done for the love of God. Kartano kakum nishkarmiya karmam. Because in practice, whatever action we do, we are motivated to do that action. Something is driving us to do that action. Generally, what drives us to do action is our desires. So most actions are karmic karmas. If we are to do action without being driven by desire, then it must be driven by something. So it's only when we do action for the love of God that it becomes nishkarmiya karma. So it's karma yoga is actually much misunderstood. People think busying yourself with external activity is karma yoga. No, the key to karma yoga is the nishkarmiya. And you can be nishkarmiya, that means without desire for any fruit of that action, only to the extent you're doing it out of love for God. And when Bhagavan goes on to describe whatever nishkarmiya karmas we are doing, he's not talking about worldly activity. He says, there are actions of body, speech, and mind. That the nishkarmiya karma that's done by body is called puja. That which is done by speech is done by japa. That which is done by mind is called meditation. So it's only the spiritual, that is these sort of practices that Bhagavan is talking about in nishkarmiya karma. Bhagavan isn't recommending you go out and work in the world. Okay, if it's our destiny to do some work in the world, we should do that work with detachment. But so that can come under puja. That if we are doing actions for the love of God, as Bhagavan says, enuru yavam ireyuru amena enivari padal undipara isan nalpusane undipara. That is, if we worship anything, considering all the forms of the world to be forms of God. That is, God is said to have 8 forms, according to Shaiva Siddhanta. So that's what Bhagavan refers to as Enuru, Ashtamurti. Enuru also means, En can also mean thought. So Enuru can also mean forms of thought. Everything is a form of thought. All these forms of thought are nothing but forms of God. If we consider everything to be a form of God, and we are doing the action for the love of God, then that's good puja. So that could include whatever work we are destined to do. I mean, we all, according to destiny, our body, speech, and mind are driven to do certain actions. If we are doing those actions without desire for any result, but just for the love of God, that also becomes a type of puja.
Okay.
The next question is from Jose. He writes, this one is regarding reincarnation and jnanis. If each lifetime is really nothing but a dream, how do we know that a jnani does not dream again after his lifetime is over? The only way I can see a jnani not dreaming another life is that his and everyone else's intellect lies prior to every life dream. In other words, we somehow have the ability to hold memories and progress between dreamed lifetimes. If this is truly the case, not only is this a dream, but also me as the formless dreamer will remember some of its contents after it ends. If this is the case, this would have an important implication for the ajnani and the jnani. For the ajnani, it would mean that he would be faced with maybe some confusion after leaving the so-called waking state body, whether whatever attained spiritual progress would remain, and Bhagavan's absolute mercy would be needed to forget some of the dream life contents, so he would continue some other dream lifetime on his spiritual path. For the jnani, however, no confusion would occur, since he sees the departure of the waking state body as the end of yet another content in awareness, and the absolute happiness that was already not interrupted during waking state now continues here in the bodiless state. If, on the other hand, the intellect is contained within the dream, it ends with it. I wouldn't really have any way to explain what is it that prevents a jnani from dreaming again. Could you please elaborate on what happens to us, jnanis and ajnanis, when we leave the waking body? What is it that dreams? The dreamer is only ego. What is the jnani? The jnani, as Bhagavan often used to say, jnana me jnani, that is, jnana alone is the jnani. Jnana in this context means pure awareness. What is it that knows pure awareness? Only pure awareness knows pure awareness. So that's why Bhagavan said, Jnana me Nyani. That is, pure awareness alone is what knows pure awareness. So the Nyani is nothing but pure awareness. Pure awareness is what we all actually are. Why we seem to be something other than pure awareness is that we seem to have risen as ego. When we rise as ego, we project and identify ourselves with the body, and thereby we, through the five senses of that body, we project other phenomena. So the dreamer is ego. Regarding the intellect is one of the five sheaths. It is what is called the Vijnanamaya kosha. Intellect is not where memories reside. Intellect is the judging and discriminating aspect of the mind. The memories are a type of internal perception. That is, they're recorded perception, so to say. But we can recall and view in our mind whenever we remember them. They are the perceptions, memories, thoughts, feelings, all the grosser functions of the mind are contained within the Manomaya kosha, not in the Vijnanamaya kosha. Vijnanamaya kosha is just the ability to judge, to distinguish one thing from another, the power of distinguishing, of reasoning. That is their intellect. It is not memories that bring about repeated lives. What brings about repeated lives is the vasanas. The vasanas are not contained in the Manomaya kosha or in the Vijnanamaya kosha. They are stored, or that is what is called the Anandamaya kosha is nothing but the totality of all vasanas. That is also called chittam, the will. That is what produces the next dream. When we start a new life, generally we don't remember anything about previous lives. By certain practices, it may be possible for people to remember past life experiences, but even if you do so, it's of no use. But it's not memory that is bringing about the repetition of birth. It is the vasanas. And the root of all the vasanas is ego, because whose vasanas are they? They are my vasanas. So that the me and the my is the ego. So vasanas exist only for ego. So long as we rise as ego, we have vasanas to a greater or lesser extent. And those vasanas are what get projected as dreams. As Bhagavan said, there is no difference between waking and dream. However, that in the sense that what we now call waking is nothing but another dream. And even when we are dreaming, it seems to us we're waking. But the whole of our present life is one dream. It's interrupted by periods of sleep and dream, but it is one continuous dream. I mean, it is one dream. Within this dream, we have periods of sleep, and we also had periods of dreams. So the dreams we have at night when we go to bed, they are dreams within a dream. So when we are dreaming at night, we generally remember our identity. We remember I am so-and-so, I'm such and such a person. And many of the memories that we have in the waking state, we will also have in the dream state. That is one of the reasons why people often say, or one of the arguments people give to say that waking is more real than dream, is that waking there's a continuity. But what is it that gives the sense of continuity in the waking state? It's our memories of the past. If we had amnesia, if we had completely forgot everything that had happened to us in the past, there wouldn't be any sense of continuity. The sense of continuity is because we have memories going back to childhood and to our teenage years and our 20s and our 30s. This all together gives us a picture of a continuous life. But when we are dreaming, we have the same memories. While dreaming, we can remember what we did as a child. But because in dream, it seems to us we're awake. So the sense of continuity is there as much in dream as it is in waking. but as I say, the nighttime dreams are dreams within a dream. This is a dream. When this dream comes to an end, all the memories come to an end with it generally. Unless, I mean, I think there are maybe certain yogic practices you can do to recall past lives. And there are some people who have some sort of recollection of their past lives. Sometimes people can remember languages they knew in a past life or something, at least when they're put into a state of hypnosis. So we can't say all memories are totally lost, but for all practical purposes, we forget our previous lives. I mean, most of us don't have no recollection at all of previous lives. But memory is not an important thing. Memories are just fleeting things which come and go. Things that we remembered 10 years ago we'll have forgotten now. Things that we remember now we'll have forgotten 10 years hence. So memories are, and also memories change after some time. We think back to our childhood and think, was it like this or was it like that? We're not even quite sure. And probably we reconcile ourselves to a certain sequence of events, but that may not actually been what happened. But we just sort of we accept that this must have happened before this, even though it may not have done. So memories are very unreliable. But anyway, that's about dream. Coming to the Nyani, as I say, is Jnana. Jnana is what alone is real. Jnana is the pure awareness I am. The Nyani is nothing other than that. What dreams is not the pure awareness I am, it is only ego. Ego is the false awareness, I am this body, I am so-and-so, I am such and such a person. The person may differ in each dream. We identify ourselves with a different body, but the ego remains the same. The ego is that which is always aware of itself as I am this person, whatever that, whichever the current person happens to be. So it's only ego that dreams. In what we call the attainment of jnana is nothing but the annihilation of ego. It is not actually an attainment of anything because jnana is ever present. Even now we are jnanis, but because we've risen as ego, we seem to be something other than that. Even now, jnana is our real nature. In verse 13 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan begins by saying, Jnanamam tane me. That means we who are jnana, we who are aware, pure awareness, alone are real. Even now we are jnana, but because we've risen as ego, we seem to be unaware of that jnana. When the ego is annihilated, what remains is only jnana. And what is the jnani? Nothing but that jnana. So the jnana never dreams anything because jnana is pure awareness. Pure awareness means awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself. The jnani has never dreamt in the past and therefore can never dream in the future. I mean, the jnani is nothing but jnana, which is not what dreams. The dreamer is only ego. So when ego is annihilated, all dreaming comes to an end because ego is the dreamer. Yeah, and you asked me, can you elaborate on what happens to us, jnanis and ajnanis, when we leave the waking state body? The jnani has left ego and therefore has left the body already. The ego that was aware of itself as I am Venkataraman died in Madurai on that day in 1896 when that intense fear of death came. That was the end of that ego, and therefore thereby Bhagavan had already left the body. It's only in our view that Bhagavan continued for another 54 years to live with that body. But what was living in that body was not the ego, it is just our own real nature, where we have projected outside in the form of Bhagavan, and through that body, we are being given guidance. So it's our own real nature that has appeared outside in the form of Guru, in the form of Bhagavan, in the form of Nyani, to tell us to turn within. So rather than inquiring about what happens after we leave the body, let's find out, who am I here and now? What is leaving the body? It's just the ending of a dream. When one dream comes to an end, sooner or later another dream will start. So we don't have to be overly concerned about questions about birth and death, because if we understand that it's all just a dream, one dream comes to an end, another dream starts. The problem is the dreamer. So who am I, the dreamer? That's what we need to investigate. And if we investigate ourselves keenly enough, we will find what we actually are is pure awareness. We have never been this ego, therefore we have never dreamt anything. That is the ultimate truth. In a subsequent email, Jose wrote, I noticed that there's a problem with my question. I continue seeing the Nyani as a person. I might not see him as an ordinary person or as someone who is having a life in a specific body, but I do see him as a person that is having a set of lives in a consecutive line of dreams, and even in between dreams. I realize this is not possible. The Nyani is simply the screen. Absolutely, that is quite correct. The screen here means the background awareness in which all phenomena appear. So the Nyani is just that screen. Just like the screen, Bhagavan often used to say, the screen is unaffected, whatever pictures may be projected on it. If a film of a flood is projected on the screen doesn't become wet. If a film of a raging fire, the forest fire, is projected on the screen isn't burned. The screen is untouched by whatever may appear on it. The screen is that background of pure awareness. That is what the Nyani is. Jnana me Nyani. Jnana alone is the Nyani. And in his final paragraph, Jose wrote, there is simply the screen only. Everything exists as a projection of the screen. Maybe the question would be better worded as, what is it that projects the contents of the screen? Well, it's the screen itself. What else is there? How and why? No one knows why. No one knows. And why? Who cares? Who is trying to figure this out? Again, I need to catch myself. Who am I? Who is this I? Yes, correct. We need to catch ourselves. We need to investigate who am I. But what is wrong here? It's not the screen that has projected the pictures. It's when we are the screen, but we have seemingly risen as ego, and it's only as ego that we are projected. In other words, it is not the screen that projects pictures, but the screen is just pure awareness. It's only the screen as ego that has projected this picture. So the screen never projects anything. The screen, as it actually is, but our real nature never projects anything. What projects and perceives everything is only ourself as ego. It's very important to understand that distinction. But the pure awareness never does anything. The nature of pure awareness, the nature of jnana, is just being, not doing. Projecting and perceiving, that's all doing. That's all the nature of ego, not the nature of pure awareness, which is what we actually are. So, Jose, I hope I've adequately answered your questions.
Thank you. Yes, you did.
Okay. Sanjay, you have a question?
Yes, sir, I have a question, sir. Is my voice clear to you, sir? It's coming clearly?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. Now, when I told my friend that I will be participating in a one-to-one Zoom meeting with you,
yes,
asking you questions, he replied, why don't you write emails to him and clarify your doubts? Why expose yourself to a public forum and invite all sorts of negative comments from mischief makers? Now, in our last conversation, there were a lot of unwanted comments under the video we did. So I believe he also implied that why do you want to show off that you are on a spiritual path? Just ask Michael privately whatever you want to ask him. My friend feels that I'm a fanatic. He advises me to give up my attachment to Michael James. He says, be attached to his message, not to Michael James. You had written in an email that be attached to the message, not to the messenger. So he just quoted that to me. So my question is, sir, so do you think that it is better to ask our questions more privately through emails or WhatsApp than asking over such public forums like Zoom. Since you convert these conversations into video, which is open to trolls, my friend had all these doubts and concerns. So how do I respond to my friend's concern? How do you guide him that this is okay to talk over a Zoom?
Well, it's your friend's choice. I mean, we all have to make a choice. Regarding asking me questions by email, I receive dozens of emails every day, and the vast majority of them I'm not able to answer. There are so many, many of the emails I end up answering are the more mundane ones that have to be attended to. So I wish I had more time to answer all the questions that I had. It is in many ways much easier for me to answer questions during face-to-face. It's also, it can be a dialogue also. So it is certainly it's certainly easier for me sometimes to answer questions by face-to-face conversation over Zoom. Regarding putting it on YouTube, when we live in this world, we are exposed to both praise and blame. There will be some people who praise us, who appreciate us, and there will be some people who will read some wrong motive into what we're doing. This is just a fact of life. In order to remain, by hiding ourselves away, we can hide ourselves away from the world. We cannot hide ourselves away from ego. So when we are exposed to both praise and blame, that is a good opportunity for us to learn to be inwardly unaffected by these things. If we are able to remain immune to praise to some extent, it's more difficult to remain immune to blame. When people find fault with us, we feel hurt. We feel, oh, we're being misunderstood. That is natural. But we have to rise above these things. We have to learn to be detached and not to be affected by whatever people may say to us or about us. Even Bhagavan, there were people who found fault with Bhagavan. There were people who criticized, oh, he accumulated so much wealth and he wrote a will and he signed it all away to his brother. There will always be, if people want to find fault, they will find some reason to find fault. Bhagavan, that question of a will, that is a complete different story. And Bhagavan didn't, I mean, it wasn't Bhagavan's will. It was the will of the devotees whose ashram, who had contributed to the ashram. They wanted it to be continued. And so they had this idea that there should be a will. But that led to so many misunderstandings. Even before that, when Bhagavan was on the hill, there were other sadhus who were jealous of him. Those sadhus gave trouble in one way or another. There were later, when more followers came around Bhagavan, there were people who wanted to be foremost among the devotees. There was Paramal Swami who wanted to be the ashram manager. And when other devotees chose Bhagavan's brother, he was disgruntled and he felt, oh, Bhagavan's siding with his brother. It wasn't Bhagavan's choice. Bhagavan is indifferent to all these things. These things are just happening around him. So there will be, when we live in this world, there will be people who and some, also none of us are perfect. We all may make mistakes at times. So sometimes if people find fault with us, there may be some justification in their finding fault with us, or at least we can see from their perspective, this is how it must seem, even though wasn't our intention. So we have to learn, we are living in this world. According to our destiny, we are exposed to people to a greater or lesser extent. As spiritual aspirants, we tend to like to withdraw ourselves. But if it's our destiny to be exposed to the world, we can't avoid it. And we have to learn from our experience. We have to learn. when we face praise or blame, we have to learn to be detached from that. But how can we be detached from that? Only by going within more and more and more. So this is all part of life. If someone, I mean, some people say to me they want to have private conversation and they don't want it to be, they don't want it to be put on Zoom. I always respect that, obviously. But if people don't object, I share it on Zoom because sometimes people seem to find these videos useful. But it's entirely up to people. If they want to watch, they can watch. If they don't want to watch, they need not watch. So we're just making it available if people find it useful. If they don't find it useful, it doesn't matter. And if someone wants to find fault with us for publicizing ourselves, let them find fault with us. We have to be sure what is our motivation. Are we seeking the world, or are we seeking our real nature? If we're seeking our real nature, we need not be concerned about what people say about us. That doesn't mean we won't be concerned. We won't be, because none of us have yet attained the state of egolessness, so we are still affected by praise and blame. So, but it's better for us to be blamed than to be praised, because praise is far more dangerous. Because praise is, if someone praises us and we begin to believe there's some justification in their praise, oh, I'm worthy of this praise, that is where our downfall begins. So let us not worry too much about people finding fault with us, but let us be very, very wary of anyone who praises us. Does that adequately answer your question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. More than.
But as far as your friend is concerned, don't be concerned about your friend. If your friend doesn't want to take part in these things, that's fine. It's up to, I mean, everyone is.
I told him that I am going ahead. I am convinced. I like talking to Michael, seeing him smile back at me, because when I'm writing emails, I can't see his face and his smile and his response. So it's better to talk face to face. But he was very apprehensive. He said, no, you don't expose yourself. I advise you as a friend. So I just thought to bring this to your notice, that there is such a thing.
Okay, yeah. Well, people have different views, and let everyone follow what they feel is right for them. I mean, yes. There's no hard and fast do's and don'ts. What we have to be vigilant about is to prevent the rising of ego as much as possible. And how do we prevent the rising of ego? By turning our attention within. So by constantly trying to keep our attention on this rising ego, we keep it in a subdued state.
Yes, sir.
That should be. We don't always succeed. Sometimes the ego pops up and we get carried away a bit. But as far as possible, we need to be trying to keep this ego.
Yes, because when I was writing comments on your blog, my ego was popping up. Now I can recall that seeing my name pop up every time was boosting my ego. So since now you have stopped your comments since about 15 days now, I believe it's given a blow to my ego and it's for the good.
Yes, well, I think it's peaceful for all of us without.
Yes, it's much more peaceful, sir. I thought I'll be lost without the comment section, but I'm not lost. I have gained more of inwardness, so it's good.
Good.
But sir, think of starting it again. It's a request. At an appropriate time, you feel fit.
No. I think it was too many of the comments. I mean, many comments were very abusive. But even other comments, there were too many frivolous comments, and I felt it's just a distraction for people. It's not necessary. If people want to, they can write to me, and I may not be able to reply to them, but if all this online chitter chatter, I think, is not good for us on this.
Yes. So you take a call. You take a call on this. It's your call totally, and I am comfortable with both ways. If you start it, I'll limit my comments. If you don't start it, it's good. It's Bhagavan's will. Bhagavan's will. One small question. So what is the difference between rising of ego and arising of ego? There's one with rising and another is with arising of ego. Are rising and arising interchangeable terms in this context?
More or less, they're interchangeable.
Okay.
Sometimes it seems more natural to say arising, sometimes more natural to say rising. It depends on the context. I don't think there's any substantive difference between them.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I will go on to the next question I was asked by email. This is from a friend who wished to remain anonymous. What they asked is, when I go to Hindu temples, Lord Jagannath's in Puri in particular, or places of strong devotion, I sense a power that is so enormous and incomprehensible that sometimes one stands in awe or tears quietly roll down. It is like when the Lord in the Bhagavad Gita chapter 10 says, I support this universe with a fraction of my power, or when Jesus says, the earth is my footstool. Whilst I understand that ego is the illusory snake, seemingly covering the reality of the rope, Brahman, and therefore only manonasa or permanent subsidence of ego alone reveals the truth of God alone exists, sometimes there is a worry that the practice of self-abidance or self-attention doesn't honor that majesty, even though dualistic devotion does not feel natural to me. And I can't authentically claim that majesty to be myself. Should we, as you say, just accept that I know that I am, but not what I am? Bhagavan says in Upadēśa Undiyār that Atma-vichara is the most efficacious path and the purest expression of prema. Prema means love. Can you please reassure me that this is so? I guess there is a dualistic concept in my mind of a judging God of revelations who will judge and punish me at the end of my life for not loving him enough. Did Bhagavan say that heaven, hell, and judgment day are just concepts of the mind? And did he tell us to discard such concepts? Bhagavan said everything other than our real nature is just thoughts, concepts. So yes, Bhagavan said all these ideas about heaven, hell, and judgment, these are all ideas that exist in the view of ourself as ego. In sleep, we have no thought of heaven or hell or judgment or anything. So it is only as ego, it's only in the view of ourself as ego that all these ideas come into existence. So if we discard ego, we discard all of these things. That's why Bhagavan often used to say, in terms of Christianity, the original sin is nothing but ego. That is what Christians call the original sin, is actually nothing but ego. If we don't rise as ego, that is an end of original sin. We don't rise as ego. In order to permanently cease rising as ego, we need to know ourselves as we actually are. Regarding what you say about the majesty of God and everything, considering God to be something other than ourselves, or ourselves to be something other than God, is not glorifying him, as many people think, but is actually belittling him. Because if God is the infinite whole, nothing can be other than him. So people who think that Advaita is somehow belittling God because it's saying I am God, and therefore it is not actually, it is duality that is belittling God. Because if you say God is other than yourself, or that you are other than God, then God is something less than the infinite whole. Whereas what God actually is the one infinite whole. God is one only without a second. As you say, God alone exists. And that is the truth. How can we be anything other than God? Moreover, when God is so immense, unfathomable and incomprehensible, what more fitting way is there to worship him than to give ourselves wholly to him? So how do we give ourselves wholly to him? As Bhagavan says in the first sentence of the 13th paragraph of Who Am I? It's only by turning our entire attention back within. That is, as he said, what he says in that sentence is, Atma-chintane tavira, veri-chintane kalambavitku satram idam kodamo, without giving the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than Atma-chintana. The Atma-chintana means self-attentiveness. Atmanishta Paranai Irupade. That means being as Atmanishta Paranas, one who is firmly established as oneself. How can we be as one who is firmly established as oneself? Not giving in room to raise any thought other than Atmachintana. That's if we attend to ourselves so keenly, if we attend to ourselves keenly enough, there will be no room for any thought to arise, because thoughts can arise only if we attend to them. If we're attending only to ourselves, we're giving no room to rising of any other thought. When we attend only to ourselves, we are thereby remaining as Atmanishta Paran, one who is firmly established as oneself. Being thus alone is giving ourselves to God, Bhagavan says. Atmanishta Parana Irupate Tanne Isana Kualipadam. So to give ourselves entirely to God, to surrender ourselves entirely to God, that is the fitting way to worship him. Why? Because he is the one infinite whole. When we rise as ego, we are claiming a separate existence. Thereby we are belittling him. If we want to worship him truly, we have to subside in him completely. We have to give ourselves entirely to him, merge back into the whole from which we came. In this context, what Bhagavan says in verse 22 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is also very relevant. He says, consider, except by turning the mind back within, completely immersing it in God, who shines within that mind, giving light to the mind, how to fathom God by the mind. That is God, the Lord. The term he uses here is Pati, which means the Lord or God. God is that which is shining within the mind, giving light to the mind. That is, God is the light of pure awareness, a reflection of which is the awareness of the mind awareness, that is by which we are aware of other things. So the awareness that we call mind or ego is nothing but a seeming awareness. It's a reflection of the original light of pure awareness. And it's only by this mind light that we know all other things. But by this mind light, we cannot know God. So, because we are looking, in order to know other things, we are looking away from God, because God is the original light in our heart. So in order to know God, in order to fathom God, as he says here, we need to turn our attention back within and thereby completely immerse ourselves in that light. We need to lose ourselves in the light of pure awareness. When we lose ourselves in the light of pure awareness, that is the state where we truly know the majesty and immensity of God. So to truly worship God, the most appropriate way is to turn our mind within. So the religions that talk about judgment and talk about heaven and hell, this is all appropriate for people at a certain stage of spiritual development. That is, naughty children need to be threatened. They need to be threatened with punishment. If you disobey, if this, you'll be punished. So a lot of religion is about punishment. That if you step out of line, you have to go to hell and you have to suffer or whatever. I mean, but this is all this is suitable for more immature souls. When we're attracted to the path of bhakti or jnana, we can leave behind all these ideas of heaven and hell and judgment and all these things. Because what is God? What is the true nature of God? God is love. So when we start on the path of bhakti, we are beginning to love God, who is love itself. So we are giving love back to its source, back to God. So once we started on the path of bhakti, in the Bible, they talk about being God-fearing, but good people should be God-fearing. When we love God, we have nothing to fear from God. It's only if we are going away from God that God may seem someone fearful who is going to punish us. God actually never punishes us. God may seem sometimes to punish us, but that is only to bring us back to, because God's ultimate aim, God is nothing but our own self. God is trying to draw us back to himself. So if we seem to be punished by God for our wrong deeds, that is only because he's trying to draw us back to himself. As I say, once we come to this path of bhakti and jnana, we don't have to worry about all these ideas about heaven and hell. We don't want to go to heaven. We don't want to go to hell. We want to be as we actually are. We want to surrender ourselves completely to God and to merge in him and be one with him. That state of oneness with God is beyond heaven and hell. So we don't have to be concerned ourselves about these things. And the idea that God is judging us, that is also, it's a childish story told to people of childish mentality. God does reward the fruits of our actions are what we have to experience as prarabdha. So in that sense, God is, maybe it can be said God is punishing us, but that's not a judgment. God knows, God is is leading us towards purification of mind. God is trying to create circumstances that are conducive for us to purify our mind. Purify our mind means to free ourselves of our desires and attachments, to weaken our Vishaya vasanas, our outward going vasanas. The more our mind is purified, the more willing we will be to surrender ourselves to him. And there's no greater devotion than to give ourselves entirely to God. And in order to give ourselves entirely to God, we need to investigate ourselves. We need to turn our attention within. That is why the pinnacle of the path of bhakti is the path of self-surrender. And the pinnacle of the path of self-surrender is the path of self-investigation. Because we can surrender other things to some extent without self-investigation. But in order to surrender ourselves, it is possible only by self-investigation. So we don't have to worry. As children, we may, and from your question, I assume you were probably brought up as a Christian as I was. We were told all sorts of stories about heaven and hell and judgment day and all these things. That may have been appropriate for us at that time, but now we can confidently leave all these ideas behind. Because what is God? God is love. How will a loving God punish anyone? If God seems to punish, that is only to rectify. It's not. There's no such thing as eternal damnation. If there was eternal damnation, then God wouldn't be love. If God is love, there can be no such thing as eternal damnation. There may be conditions such as hell, but that's only a temporary state in order to lead us further along the spiritual path, to rectify us and put us back on the path towards complete surrender. I hope that adequately answers the question. Because you wish to remain anonymous, I know you won't want to answer, to say that, but I hope that I've adequately answered that question of yours. Alex, you've got a question.
Hi, Michael. Well, actually, you did answer it. It was amazing. I did have a question related to, I was trying to read Bhagavad Gita, and chapter 2, verse 47, it says, to work alone, you're entitled never to its fruits. Like, I guess, meaning you rely on God. And you just, I think, answered it all. So I'm not sure if I have a question.
Is that the verse where it said you're entitled to the action, you're entitled to act, but not to the fruits thereof?
Yes, that the relying on God for the results.
Yes.
Yeah. Self-surrender bhakti. That's
yeah. We shouldn't act motivated by desire. In other words, we should act motivated only by the love of God, and we should give all the fruit of our actions to God.
Yes,
bad actions and give the fruit to God. You act out of love of God, but you're not seeking any benefit from that. You're offering it to God.
Yes, and you answered by saying by doing it you self-surrender, and by self-surrendering you do self-investigation. So that was kind of like an answer to me. Yeah. Yes. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, but that is the self-surrender can be complete only by self-investigation. We need to know what it is we are what it is we are surrendering in order to surrender it. So we need to investigate ourselves. When we know ourselves as we actually are, we are thereby surrendering ego, which is not what we actually are.
Thank you.
Amit, I'll answer your question in a minute. I'll answer one more question that I've been asked by email. Another friend who also wishes to remain anonymous has written, I suffer from bipolar disorder, which has cyclical phases of depression and elation. My condition is quite stable now, and I'm off medications by Bhagavan's grace. I think whatever little practice of Atma-vichara I have done has greatly helped me to overcome this issue to a considerable extent. So if this practice has helped in my case, I'm sure it will help in many other similar issues like depression and such things. How exactly does Atma-vichara help in controlling depression and elation? It will be a useful topic to elaborate and understand. As we know, depression and similar things are rampant nowadays. Suicides are at an all-time high. So your answer may help many of us to appreciate the benefits of Bhagavan's path. Yes, Bhagavan's ultimate aim is that we know ourselves as we actually are, but along the way, it rectifies so many things and makes our life so much more pleasant than it would otherwise have been. That is very true. Viewed from a medical perspective, then that is, medicine may, that is, the medical science may try to look for physical, for biochemical causes of mental illness. But ultimately, whatever we experience our experience of life is colored by our vasanas. When our vasanas are out of control, that can lead to mental instability, it can lead to depression, elation, it can lead to all sorts of mental illnesses. In Bhagavan's path, this is, well, in any spiritual path, we are trying to curb the vasanas to a greater or lesser extent. In the Bhakti Marga, that is done by, well, in the early stages of the Bhakti Marga, that is done by devotion to God, by trying to accept everything as the will of God and direct all our love towards God. That can help to a great extent to overcome feelings of depression and elation. Sometimes when we say that, people who have experienced clinical depression say, oh, no, it's not so easy as that. If you've not really experienced depression, that is depression, if you think you can overcome it by devotion to God or anything like that. But it is possible to overcome all these things to the extent to which we offer ourselves to God, to the extent to which we surrender ourselves to God. And in the more advanced stages of the path of bhakti, we understand that God is not something outside. God is that which is shining in us as I. So we then start directing our love and attention within to know who am I. The more we do so, the more we are curbing our Vishaya Vasanas. We are weakening the Vishaya Vasanas. Vishaya Vasanas are the inclinations that draw our attention to go outwards. By turning our attention within, we are slowly weaning our mind off its Vishaya Vasanas. We are weakening the Vishaya Vasanas. The weaker our Vishaya Vasanas become, the less liable we will be to experience depression and panic attacks and elation and all these other things that nowadays are called mental ill health. What is mental health ultimately? Mental health and ill health, it is nothing but to what extent are we allowing ourselves to be driven to act under the sway of our vasanas. If we allow our mind to be swept away by its vasanas, we will experience depression, we will have phobias, we will have panic attacks, we will have moments of great elation. All these things will be there so long as we are allowing our mind to be swept, we're allowing our mind to wander under the sway of its vasanas, as Bhagavan says. In the spiritual path, whether by devotion to God or by trying to turn our mind within, which is the highest devotion to God, the most pure devotion to God, we are curbing our Vishaya Vasanas. We are avoiding allowing ourselves to wander under their sway. We are trying to come under the sway of God's love rather than the sway of our vasanas. So to the extent to which we turn within and surrender ourselves to God, to that extent, we will be protecting ourselves from all forms of mental illness. Okay, sometimes in later life, there may be some dementia or something may come. But what is dementia? Dementia is a person suffering from dementia, their memories may be going. They may forget who they are, but essentially, if we are following the spiritual path, even if all the memories are fading away, even if we're no longer able to do simple actions of life, like remembering things and knowing what to do in certain situations, inwardly, if we've been following the spiritual path, the dementia won't affect our inward peace, our inward state of surrender. So mental illness, ultimately, the causes of all mental illness are our vasanas. I'm not counting dementia as a mental illness in this case, because dementia is just a lessening of certain cognitive faculties, memory and ability to do certain things. Some people who suffer from dementia, they suffer from a depression as a result of the dementia. But a person who has been following the spiritual path, a person who has learned how to avoid depression before having dementia, will not be affected by depression. Some people who have dementia, they get depressed, they get angry and everything. But if we've been following this spiritual path, even if the dementia sets in, we will not be depressed about it. We will not get angry about it. We'll just accept, okay, it's God's will that I should forget these things. It's God's will that I should no longer be able to do what I used to do. We will just accept it. It will not be a problem. So ultimately, this path Bhagavan has taught us, this path of self-investigation and self-surrender, this is a solution to all problems. The ultimate cause of all problems is ego. So this is the means to root out ego. But even in the process of rooting out ego, there are so many benefits are attained in terms of inner peace and of gaining the, as Bhagavan says, ipri paraka paraka manatiku tan piripiditil tangi irkum shakti adikari kindradu. That is, by practicing this path of self-investigation and self-surrender, we get that strength to remain firmly established in our birthplace. That's in our source, that's in our heart. To the extent that we're able to remain firmly in our heart, to hold on to self-attentiveness, to that extent we will not be affected by vasanas, and therefore it's the vasanas that ultimately give rise to all sorts of mental illness. I hope that adequately answers the question of the friend who asked this. I know he's here now. So Amit, you had a question.
Hello, good afternoon. Hope you're well. Good to talk to you, and thank you. My question is on the ego and vasanas. Ego is the formless phantom. When we investigate, it really isn't there. We perceive it to be there.
Yes.
The vasanas you mentioned are what remains from one in the jiva, from one life to another life. But you also said that the vasanas are really, who do they belong to? They belong to the ego.
Yes.
But if the ego isn't really there, but the vasanas are there, but they move on, so how are they related?
Okay, in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says, Ahandayun dayin anatumundahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahandayin drel indruanatum. Ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. So if there's no ego, there are no vasanas. Ego doesn't actually exist, but it seems to exist. And because we seem to be ego, we seem to have vasanas and we seem to be experiencing this world. So the vasanas are no more real than the ego. Vasanas, in sleep there are no vasanas. Vasanas arise only along with the, the vasanas are the baggage that ego brings along with it. As far as you actually asking a question, the next but one question I was, Jose had asked a question, which is by email, which is, what is the relationship between vasanas and ego? Is deliverance from vasanas the same as deliverance from ego? So this is more or less the same question you're asking.
Yes.
The answer to the second question of Jose is yes, deliverance from vasanas is the same as deliverance from ego. Ego is like the commander-in-chief of an army, whereas the vasanas are like the soldiers. So long as the soldiers, so long as the army is strong, the commander-in-chief is safe. Nobody can kill the commander-in-chief so long as he's surrounded by his army. Bhagavan uses an analogy in the 11th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, where he talks about the vasanas as if they're the enemy. He says, so long as there are enemies within the fort, they will keep on coming out. If we continue cutting them down as and when they come, eventually the fort will be able to take possession of the fort. The fortress is our heart. From our heart, from which the vasanas are coming out. So long as vasanas remain, they will continue coming out. But the more we weaken the vasanas, though he says they're cutting them down one by one, that is because of the analogy he uses. He talks of cutting them down one by one. Actually, we cannot cut vasanas one by one. What happens when we're turning our attention within, we are weakening the vasanas. That is, the Vishaya vasanas are what draw our mind outwards. So every time we resist the pull of our Vishaya vasanas by clinging firmly to self-attentiveness, we are thereby weakening the Vishaya vasanas. So collectively, it's not that one by one the vasanas are removed, it's the whole army of vasanas are gradually weakened. They get weaker and weaker and weaker. And only when that army of vasanas is sufficiently weak are we able to break through and get to the root of them, which is ego, and can we get rid of ego? Metaphorically speaking. So the relationship between the vasanas and ego, as I say, ego is the commander-in-chief. Without the commander-in-chief, the army it cannot do anything on its own. In fact, there is no army. The army disperses. As soon as you kill the commander-in-chief, the army all run away. Well, I mean, they cease to exist. The army ceases to exist. But any analogy has its limitation. But in this case, so long as the army is strong, we cannot root out the ego, because the army will always be protecting the ego, the army of Vishaya vasanas. When the army is sufficiently weakened, we are then able to kill their commander-in-chief ego, and the army disperses. Does that adequately answer your question, Amit, and your question, Jose?
Yes, it does. This means with self-investigation, it does involve a process of weakening the vasanas, which may take some time.
Yes.
And once the vasanas are reduced, then we may make some.
We cannot destroy the vasanas entirely so long as ego is there. That is, having vasanas is the nature of ego. What we are doing at every moment in life, we have a choice, either to attend to things other than ourselves or to attend to ourselves. So long as we are attending to things other than ourselves, we are sustaining the Vishaya vasanas. But when we turn our attention back towards ourselves, we are thereby weakening the Vishaya vasanas, because the Vishaya vasanas is the inclination to go outwards. The more we go within, the more the inclination to go outwards is weakened. Vishaya Vasanas is what are called the impurities of mind. Self-investigation is the most effective means to weaken the Vishaya Vasanas. It is not the only means. By bhakti, for example, we can weaken our Vishaya Vasanas. That is, the more we have love for God, the more we yield ourselves to God, the more we resign ourselves to the will of God, the more we are thereby curbing our vasanas. When difficulties come in life, we accept, okay, this is God's will, this is for my good. So in this way, that is a means of curbing the Vishaya Vasanas. But the most effective of all means, the most direct means to curb the Vishaya Vasanas is self-investigation, because self-investigation is going in the opposite direction to the Vasanas. The Vasanas are what are turning our mind outwards. Self-investigation is turning our mind back within. So that's how the Vasanas are weakened by self-investigation.
Thank you.
So a term that is often used, a synonym for liberation, is Vasanaksha. Vasanaksha means destruction of the Vasanas. But you cannot destroy the Vasanas without destroying the root. But you cannot destroy the root without first weakening the Vishaya Vasanas to a considerable extent. It's like if you've got a very dense bush and you want to root it out, you cannot get at the root because the leaves and branches are so dense. You first have to cut back the leaves and branches to a considerable extent in order to get at the root. Then you can cut up the root. The leaves and branches are the Vasanas. So long as they're very strong, so long as that is, in order to annihilate the ego must be willing to surrender itself. So long as its Vishaya Vasanas are strong, that means it's not willing to surrender itself. Because Vishaya Vasanas are the exact opposite of willingness to surrender. So to the extent that our Vishaya Vasanas are weakened, to that extent we will be willing to surrender ourselves. And our willingness to surrender ourselves will itself be weakening our Vishaya Vasanas. So it's all part of the same process. The willingness to surrender ourselves, that is bhakti. The weakening of Vishaya Vasanas, that is vairagya. Bhakti and vairagya are inseparable.
Thank you.
I'd like to share something, Michael, maybe, that when you bring your attention back within, you are withdrawing the attention from external objects.
Yes.
As a result, the mind, it really doesn't want to, to let go the external object.
Yes.
It can actually cause an internal sensation of bad feelings and what seems to be a negative reaction, because the mind wants to go out so badly, but you are bringing it back in.
Yes.
And then it's like a child that wants to go out, but you're just bringing it back home.
Yes.
Then eventually, what I noticed at some point was that this actually gives up. There's a point where, personally, I felt things in my body, vibrations in my body. And then after some of these vibrations, I stopped feeling those vibrations, but I also, this tendency of going outwards for this certain number of objects was not there anymore. And I experienced this as a big relief.
Yeah.
So finally, the mind stopped this weird things going outwards into this. So the thing, it didn't burn them all, because then eventually the mind wanted to go outwards, but not for these objects anymore, but for these other objects now.
Yeah.
They back within, and then same thing. Seems like an iterative process. Am I following this correctly?
But Bhagavan has said this battle between our liking to turn within and our desires to go outwards. This is what is in Puranic stories, in mythological stories, what is depicted as the battle between the devas, between the gods and the demons. devas and asuras, that warfare that is always going on between devas and asuras is nothing but this battle that is always going on in the heart of a spiritual aspirant between the liking to turn within and the vasanas to go outwards, the inclination to go outwards. So when we are trying to turn within, the vasanas will manifest in many different forms in order to distract our attention away from ourselves. So if you are experiencing sensations in your body, though they're inside the body, they're still external phenomena. They're things other than you. So that is the mind. The mind is using these, is creating these sort of sensations in order to distract our attention away from ourselves. So this is all these experiences, the sensations in the body, the thoughts, or whatever it is that distracts our attention away from ourselves. This is what Bhagavan calls the enemy coming out of the fortress. So we cut them down one by one. That means we don't allow our mind to be carried away by these, to be distracted away from ourselves. We bring our attention back towards ourselves. Because whatever we may experience, whether it's sensations in the body or whatever it may be, some people even experience divine visions or ecstatic states, all sorts of things. These are all, anything that appears is not ourself. What we are is that which is ever present. So anything that appears is the Vishaya. Even if it's a divine vision of God or something, or divine light or beautiful music, or even if it's a hellish state of that is fear or whatever it may be, it's all anya, it's all something other than ourselves. So we need to, this is all the enemy coming out of a fortress. We need to constantly cut down the enemy by turning our attention within. This battle continues up to the very end. We can't avoid this battle. So long as there is ego, the share of vasanas will be there. They may manifest in different ways, but still they're trying to draw our attention away from ourselves. And the more determined we are, the more we have true love to turn within, the more vigorously the vasanas will be rising to try and distract our attention away from ourselves. So even though the vasanas may be weakened, their fight back is very strong. If a tiger is wounded and in a corner, because it's wounded, it's very weak. But because it's in a corner, if someone goes towards it, it'll fight back very fiercely. So the ego and its vasanas are like that. The weaker they become, the more fiercely they will fight back. That's why in the poetry of great saints, but even you can see it in Bhagavan's Aksharamala, I mean Bhagavan's 5 hymns to Arunachala, and in this of great saints like Manikavasaka and Murugana and Sadhuam, you can see this, you can see they're constantly talking about themselves as being the worst of the worst, the lowest of the lowest, because that is their actual experience. They feel they're so totally unworthy because of the strength with which their Vishaya Vasanas are fighting back. Actually, they're in a far more pure state than we are, but the more the mind is purified, the more painfully we become aware of the remaining impurities. In a very dirty cloth, you can't see the individual stains. If you begin to clean the cloth, you begin to see the stains more clearly. As the cloth gets whiter, the stains stand out more. Sadhguru often used to give the example of the moon. In a crescent moon, or even in a half moon, in a crescent moon, you can't see the craters at all. In a half moon, you can vaguely see the craters. Only in a full moon, you can see the craters very clearly. So the purer the mind becomes, the more the impurities will stand out. So this is a battle that goes on till the very end. But it's a battle that we will surely win. All we need to do is to persevere in trying to turn our attention back within. So does that adequately answer, sir? Okay.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. I will now, another question that I was asked by email. Sue has asked, please can you elaborate on how Ramana did not see people and animals as other, instead saw as self, no difference. He did this to the point of allowing the bees to sting him. Also, is this how we develop our compassion and help others? Is this also how we stop identifying things as good and bad, instead of focusing on the self-oneness, which sees no difference? Yes, that is how Bhagavan did not see anything as other. Is Bhagavan, because he had turned his attention within and seen himself as he actually is, he was clearly aware of himself as the one pure awareness, other than which nothing exists. We see Bhagavan as a person. And as a person, he seems to be seeing others. He seems to be seeing other people, and he seems to be seeing other animals. But we see from the actions of that person, whom we take to be Bhagavan, we see so much love and compassion there. So his compassion was so great, but when accidentally he disturbed a hornet's nest, when his thigh brushed against the bush in which there was a hornet's nest, he allowed the hornets, they weren't just bees, they were hornets, really. The hornets have a very big variety of bees and very, very painful sting they have. He allowed them to come, and they all settled on his thigh, and they stung his thigh mercilessly until they were fully satisfied. He didn't get stings anywhere else except on the thigh. Why? Because he just stood there and let them sting his thigh. He had so much love and compassion. He felt he had done wrong to them. He should take the punishment that they were giving him. But the truth is, Bhagavan didn't see any others. As I read earlier in verse 31, he says, in that state, one does not see anything other than oneself. So who can and how to understand that state? So we cannot understand his state. If we want to understand it, we have to be in that state. That is, we have to surrender ourselves wholly to him. Then we will be in that state of oneness in which there are no others. Then only we will, well, even to say we'll comprehend is not quite correct. We will be that state, because there's no mind there to comprehend anything. It is just a state of just pure awareness. So it's only in our view that Bhagavan is seeing others. But in our view, Bhagavan is that person sitting on the couch, or that person wearing a loincloth. All the other people and animals are others. But in his view, he was aware just of himself. And whatever appeared in our view, in his view, is just himself. That is, what actually exists is only pure awareness. We see that one pure awareness as subject and so many objects, as ourself and others. Because he had eradicated ego, because for him there was no ego, for him there was no distinction between himself and others. There was only that one pure awareness. So your question, is this how we develop compassion and love for others? Yes, when we are following this path of self-investigation, to the extent that we are going deep in this path of self-investigation and self-surrender, we are weakening ego. Ego is subsiding. So long as our ego is strong, we feel very strongly the difference between ourselves and others. And when ego is really strong, we care only about ourselves. Because the ego is strong, I take this person to be me, so I care only about me. Why should I care about others? What does it matter to me whether others are suffering or anything? I want what I want. That is when the ego is very strong. To the extent that we follow this spiritual path, this path of self-investigation and self-surrender, ego is subsiding. And to the extent ego subsides, the sense of difference between ourselves and others gets diminished. So, for example, if we see a person or an animal suffering, we can't bear to see that because we feel that suffering ourselves when we see them suffering. That is, what does compassion mean? Compassion means suffering with. That is when we see another and we feel their suffering, we share in their suffering. That is compassion. So the more ego subsides, the more the less strongly we'll feel that distinction between ourselves and others. So even those people who give trouble to us, we will feel sorry for them. We will feel compassion for them, just like Bhagavan felt compassion for those hornets. But that is so, to the extent to which ego subsides, to that extent we will feel compassion and love for others. And to that extent, we will be free of selfishness. So Sue, I hope that adequately answered that question of yours. Sanjay, you've got your hand up.
Yes, sir. It was a very small and a quick question. Now, Bhagavan says in verse 3, Nishkamya karma, action not motivated by desire, done with love for God, purifies the mind, and thereby it will show the path to liberation.
Yes.
This is fine, but there are some people who do good without surrendering the fruits to God. Means they don't believe in God, but still they do good. So believe in God is not really necessary. Some people do good without expecting any fruits for themselves. So can we say that we can do away with the belief in God and still purify our mind?
Belief in God, people have many different ideas about God, but in a way, a person who is, that is, some people who do good, that is one of the motives we have for doing good, is there's a classic example of Abraham Lincoln. I think it was Abraham Lincoln, or one of the American presidents. He was walking along and he saw a pig stuck in some mud, and the pig was struggling to get out. And he got into the mud and he helped the pig out. And someone asked him, "You're the president of a vast country. Why do you take so much trouble to get yourself dirty to go in and help that pig?" He said, "I didn't do it for the pig. I did it for myself. Because I couldn't bear to see the pig suffering. I had to go in there to do it." So a lot of the good we do to others, we are actually doing for our own satisfaction. But it is true, one doesn't have to be believing God as such in order to do good actions. But there's a difference between nishkarmiya karma and merely doing good actions. You can do, as I say, you can do good actions for the satisfaction of doing those good actions. There's still a karmiya motive there. To do it truly without desire, there must be something that motivates you. So it may be love for other people. You really love a person, so you sacrifice yourself for them. Or even if it's not an individual, you may sacrifice yourself because, for example, you may feel there's a big injustice in the world. There's a lot of, for example, racism. Racism is a big problem in many countries. When you feel the injustice of racism, you may try to deal with the causes of that racism. You may do it because you genuinely feel the injustice of the racism and the way that people of different races are treated differently in society. So, I mean, this is just one example. Though you may not think of it in terms of you're doing it for God, you're still doing it for some sort of higher ideal. You've got an ideal of a kind and compassionate society, a society which is fair to everyone. So that can also be a means of purification of mind. But it's very difficult to say. It's because what purifies the mind is not the actions, it is the love with which the actions are done. That is, Bhagavan says, kartano kakam nishkarmiya karmam. That is action done without desire and for God. He doesn't use the word love in Tamil. In the Malayalam version, which in the longer meat, he actually uses the word Ishwara Pritiyanai, for the love of God. So love of God is implied there. What purifies the mind is not the actions we do, but the love with which we do it. For example, many people do do puja to Kali. They may go through exactly the same actions that Ramakrishna Paramahamsa did when he was doing puja to Kali. but they may be doing puja to Kali for the fulfillment of their worldly desires. Whereas Ramakrishna Paramahamsa was doing exactly the same actions, but wholly for the love of Kali, wholly for the love of God. So it's not the action. If you do puja in order to gain some benefit, that's not going to purify your mind. It has to be nishkarmiya, and it has to be with the love of God. So it's not the actions that are purifying the mind, it's the love with which we do them. So if someone does, if an atheist does actions out of love for humanity, love for others, that can purify their mind. Even though they may say they don't believe in God, they still are believing in, but they're believing in righteousness, they're believing in fairness, they're believing in kindness, they're believing in compassion. So yes, it has to be for some higher ideal rather than for personal gain.
So the God in this context has a wide variety of meanings,
yes,
implications.
You can say,
yeah.
You can say that. You can say that.
Yeah,
I mean, people have so many different beliefs about God.
Yes. So it's a belief in goodness, you can say.
Yeah.
A belief in.
Many atheists are much better people than many theists. There are many people who believe in God but are doing terrible actions. There are many people who don't believe in God but are very good, kind, compassionate people.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Because ultimately, Bhagavan said, there is no such thing as an atheist. Everyone believes I am. So long as you believe I am, you're believing in God, because God is that which is shining in everyone as I am.
The only thing is, if you believe in God, your spiritual progress is faster, I believe. That's the only benefit of believing in God.
It depends on your belief in God. There are many people who believe in God, but they've got very strange ideas about God. There are people who believe in God and think God wants you to go and blow yourself up and become a suicide bomber and kill people. I mean, people have all sorts of strange and wonderful ideas about God. So what sort of God do you believe in? If you believe in love, if you believe in kindness, and what is God? God is nothing but love. If you believe in love, you believe in God. So even the atheist who out of genuine love does good actions is thereby believing in God more truly than the theist who is ready to go and do terrible things in the name of God.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
I've got just one more question by email. Shall I just finish off this question? This is from Alan. Alan has asked, what would it be like to have achieved dissolution of the ego in the self? As the self is said to be one without a second, it is presumably totally uniform, and consequently, there would be no ego or intellect there to say whether it was blissful or not, or to make any other judgment for that matter. So wouldn't it be just a kind of nothingness, an oblivion of sorts, rather than a blissful state that could somehow be appreciated? We can't say what it would be like to be in that state, because obviously it is beyond the mind. But when ego is dissolved in our real nature, in pure awareness, what remains is only pure awareness. As you say, it's one without a second. So there is no intellect and nothing there. There's no world, no intellect, nothing. All that remains there is bliss. You don't need an intellect to recognize bliss as bliss. Because bliss is, Bhagavan said, happiness is our real nature. Happiness is the very nature of the pure awareness that we actually are. So in that state, we will experience happiness. We won't be judging it, saying, oh, this is happy, and that previously when ego was there, it wasn't happy. For us, there will be no differences. There will only be infinite happiness. Happiness that has no limits, that is in verse, there are so many verses where Bhagavan has given us clues about this. In verse 27 of Upadēśa Undiyār, for example, he says, only the awareness that is devoid of awareness and ignorance is real awareness. or is awareness, implying real awareness. This is real. There is nothing for knowing. There's nothing to be aware of. That is, he's talking here about in the state of pure awareness, because in the previous verse he had said, being oneself alone is knowing oneself, because oneself is not two. This is Tanmaya Nishta. This is abidance as Brahman, that means. Then he says, the state, that state, when he says awareness, the word he uses in Tamil is arivu. Arivu can mean awareness, and it can mean knowledge. So I'll use the word knowledge just for consistency. Only knowledge that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is knowledge. This is real. There is not anything for knowing. That is what he says in verse 27. When he says only knowledge that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance, he means, he's referring here to pure awareness. That is, pure awareness is devoid of both awareness of other things and ignorance of other things. That is, in pure awareness, there is no awareness of anything else. There's also no ignorance of anything else. Why? Because nothing else actually exists. It's either to know or not to know. That's why he says in the last sentence, Arivadaku ondruile. There is not anything, there's nothing for knowing. If there's nothing for knowing, you can neither know it, nor can you be ignorant of it, because it doesn't exist. So the state of pure awareness, there's nothing else to know. And then in the next verse, verse 28, he says, Tanadu Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. If one knows what the real nature of oneself is, then Anadi Ananta Akanda Satchidananda, is then beginningless, endless, unbroken existence, awareness, happiness. It's beginningless, so it doesn't happen just when the ego is annihilated, because in that state, it's a state in which there's no beginning or end. That is, time exists only in the view of ego. When ego is annihilated, time comes to an end. What then remains is the state that is beginningless, endless, and unbroken, Satchidananda. Endless, the word for endless he uses is Ananta. Ananta means both endless, it also means limitless and infinite. I mean, Anta means an end or a limit. So what is endless or limitless is infinite. So it's beginningless, endless, so it's eternal, it's infinite, and it's unbroken. It's never divided, it's never separated, and it's existence, awareness, happiness, Sat, Chit, Ananda. So that happiness is aware of itself because it is awareness. So happiness is experiencing itself. So Sat is Chit and Chit is Ananda. These three are inseparable. I mean, though we use three words, these, from the perspective of ego, existence seems to be something, awareness seems to be something, happiness seems to be something. But the truth is real existence is itself awareness and is itself happiness. So we cannot, Bhagavan, and in verse 12 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says a similar thing. In verse 12 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says, what is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is actually knowledge. That is, the real awareness is the awareness that's devoid of knowledge and ignorance of anything other than itself. That which knows is not real knowledge. Here, that which knows means ego, that which knows things other than itself. That is not real knowledge. That's not real awareness. Since one shines without another for knowing or for causing to know, oneself is knowledge. Oneself is pure, is real awareness, is the implication. Parandru, it is not a void. So our real nature is not void. Elsewhere he says it's infinite, it's a wholeness. So it seems to be emptiness. Because we take phenomena to be real, a state with no phenomena seems to us to be a state of nothingness, a state of oblivion. But actually, it's a state of fullness. It's the fullness of being, awareness, and happiness. The infinite fullness of being, awareness, and happiness. So our finite mind can never conceive that, can never grasp it, which is why he said at the end of 31, They do not know anything other than themselves. Who can or how to understand their state as it is such? So as ego, we cannot conceive this. If we want to know what that state is like, we need to merge back into our source. We need to turn our attention within and merge back into the pure awareness that we actually are. Then only can we know what is the state of pure awareness. I hope that adequately answers your question, Alan.
Hi, Michael. Could I ask one question?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Would it be correct to say that seeking self-realization takes care of self-purification, but the reverse
your
is
voice
not
broke
true?
up a little bit there. You said, would it be correct to say seeking self-realization?
Seeking self-realization takes care of self-purification, but the reverse is not true.
Yeah. Well, no. Yes, yes, and no. That is, if we are seeking to know what we actually are, in order to know what we actually are, we need to turn our attention within. By turning our attention within, we are automatically purifying the mind. That is, we're weakening the Vishaya Vasanas. But many other forms of spiritual practice, the sole aim of other forms of spiritual practice is purification of the mind. But they may say that they're seeking self-realization, but according to Bhagavan, the only means to know ourselves is to investigate ourselves and thereby surrender ourselves. Any other practice can only go so far as to purify the mind to a certain extent. So all other practices of bhakti, for example, puja, japa, and dhyana, if they are nishkamya and done for love of God, I'm not talking about the kamya. Most people who do puja, japa, and dhyana are doing it for some ulterior motive. They've got a kamya motive. If it is nishkamya and it's done for the love of God, that will purify the mind. That is seeking purification of mind is a worthy aim, certainly. But what is purification of mind is nothing but the weakening of our Vishaya Vasanas. And that is, there's no spiritual progress without purification of mind. That is all spiritual practice is about purification of mind. Ultimately, our aim is to annihilate ego, because the root of all impurity is ego. So the mind, it can be perfectly purified only by rooting out ego. When ego is rooted out, there's no mind at all. There's just purity, pure awareness. But no, we should be seeking the purification of mind. That is it. But the purification of mind is not anything other than, because the state in which the mind is perfectly purified, the state in which the root impurity, ego, is removed, that is the state of self-realization. So absolute purification of mind is what is called self-realization. But absolute purification of mind, there's no mind left there. There's just pure awareness. That is, a perfectly pure mind is not a mind at all. It's just awareness.